Our scripture this morning is from the book of Romans. Indeed, I consider the sufferings of the present to be nothing compared with the glory that will be revealed in us. All creation eagerly awaits the revelation of the children of God. Creation was subjected to transience and futility, not of its own accord, but because of the one who subjected it, in the hope that creation itself would be freed from its slavery to corruption and would come to share in the glorious freedom of the children of God. We know that from the beginning until now, all of creation has been groaning in one great act of giving birth. And not only creation, but all of us who possess the first fruits of the Spirit, we too groan inwardly as we wait for our bodies to be set free. In hope we were saved, but hope is not hope if its object is seen. Why does one hope for what one sees? And hoping for what we cannot see means awaiting it with patient endurance. The Spirit too comes to help us in our weakness, for we don't know how to pray as we should, but the Spirit expresses our plea with groanings too deep for words. And God, who knows everything in our hearts, knows perfectly well what the Spirit is saying, because its intercessions for God's holy people are made according to the mind of God. We know that God makes everything work together for the good of those who love God and have been called according to God's purpose. They are the ones God chose long ago, predestined to share the image of the only begotten, in order that Christ might be the firstborn of many. Those God predestined have likewise been called. Those God called have also been justified. And those God justified in turn have been glorified. Ancient words from our tradition for our present day understanding.
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. It's so wonderful. We kind of hobble back from COVID and have a few more people each week. We also appreciate people who are online. Thank you for being here. Taking care of yourself, whatever you need to do to feel safe, that's certainly respected. But the more we can reach across the distance, the more I'm grateful. So thank you for being here. We're doing a very long sermon series. So if you're a visitor, be grateful because I'm trying to work through how the church needs to change to be a gift for the future. And we've looked at a bunch of different areas. Actually, I've already looked at sin once. So I'm a good Calvinist. We're doing it twice. I didn't realize that till I was doing like some research. And, I already covered this. But they probably weren't listening anyway, so I can. But each of these subjects you can take a bunch of different ways. And I think that this particular one, for those who call themselves Reformed or Calvinist tradition, who are, kind of out on a limb of looking at things differently, I think to think these things through, because we're trying to not throw things away, but also to reclaim them if we possibly can. And the notion of sin has been used so abusively by the church that if you just want to take that Crayola out of the box, that's very understandable, because sometimes the trauma is too strong and you just can't go there. If you're somebody who's been dehumanized by that word, I think it's helpful to realize that one word, sin, is translating 72 different concepts in Hebrew. And some of them are not at all your fault. If you're walking along and a boulder falls off a cliff and hits you, that would fall under that category, but it's definitely not your fault. I was born a white guy in a racist culture, in a patriarchal culture, I don't want to hurt anybody. But if I don't realize that I've been born into a system that hurts people, that exploits people, that takes advantage of people, if I don't learn how to step out of that, then I'm hurting people, I don't even realize it. And that's that kind of notion of sin. It's not so much individual as we've done in this culture. It's like how our lives fit together or not. So Darwin has not been real popular in a lot of traditional Christianity. Last week we talked about evolution a little bit, and that bumper sticker that has the Christian fish eating the Darwin fish, it's so loving. I hope that doesn't sound critical of our fish eating your fish, but the irony is, to me, nothing proves evolution more than fundamentalism. Right? What is more monkey-like than collecting a small group of people like ourselves, getting the one male leader who's the measure of everything good and right and true, and then going from there and kind of attacking our enemies? There's an irony there, I think. And that I think if we can look at Darwin as talking about science and reality, Genesis is what that means inside of us. Genesis is what it feels like to lose balance. Sometimes it's not our fault at all, but all of a sudden we're not in tune with other things. I do not believe that we can step out of evolution. So for a lot of people to think that, well, we're just going to leave evolution behind, or we're going to leave this notion of that there's something wrong, there's something off balance about us. If we are primates who've left our environment and we're always being triggered by everything around us, that's kind of what Paul's talking about. But it's not your fault. You were kind of born into it. Your tissue is betraying you, not because you're a bad person at all, but because you're being traumatized by things that monkeys shouldn't have to deal with. Right? And we're not monkeys, we're apes, but sometimes you wouldn't know. Sometimes you wouldn't be able to tell. So it's very important, I think, to realize that we're primates. I think that's what Paul talked about. What does it feel like to be a primate out of our environment? Where people get too close. You ever been in an elevator where you're just kind of like, that's primate instincts, wanting a distance there, but you don't necessarily know that. And so you're being triggered and you feel like somebody else is being intrusive. Because when you're afraid, a lot of times it doesn't seem like you feel your fear. Instead, you see somebody else as evil. Somebody else is threatening. Somebody who's different can feel really scary. So we're gonna try to transform the idea of sin to understanding the human predicament. That it's not that we're bad, but as long as we're outside of our environment, we're dangerous. Right? And the environment is nature. It's not a particular country or culture. Paul says several helpful things about sin. The first is the word that he uses means to miss a target. It literally, you put an A in front of a word and it makes it the opposite in Greek. So the bullseye of a target, for whatever reason, our little sights are twisted. We're looking, we think we're doing something, and there's something inside that twists us away from the direction we want to go. Have you ever gone on a trip with your family, who you love like life itself, and made a vow to yourself before Jesus and Buddha that you weren't going to fight? This time, we're not going to fight. We fought the last 50 times, and this time, here, I cut my finger, you cut your finger. And then what happens before the day's out? Now, what is that? It doesn't take bad people. Again, it takes when your body is out of its place, and you're traumatized by everything around you. Primates on Facebook. And oh, this to Don from the class today. It's like when you think of what Facebook has done to people, then you understand the fall. I mean, the online world was pristine. This is all going to be about information and love and being able to go back and forth. And then God created trolls. The first thing somebody invented was worms and viruses to infect other people's computer. Why? Who knows? Right? But that's what Paul is talking about. If you lifted us up and put us in heaven, and we didn't like harps, the streets of gold are too bright, you know. Who thought of this? You can't even drive at sunset because this. We could be unhappy anywhere. Hell is not a place, heaven's not a place. It's a harmony or lack of harmony. So the way Paul's trying to express that is to say that it's missing the mark. Because we've evolved, we carry the past with us. Not just our past, but primordial pasts. I think that's the truth behind a lot of the beliefs in reincarnation, is that literally we have been guppies and we've been reptiles and little mammals. And that stuff is codified in our body. You look at gestation, you see going through these little stages and things. So to realize that, again, that doesn't make us bad, but we have to adjust for that. And the problem is, the more we regress, the truer it feels. And that's a lot of what's happening with fundamentalism. Right? Because we carry the past with us, it feels truer to go back in time. We're going to make America great again. Now, we are going to turn time around. We're going to go back in time before you know who was included. But we're not going to say that, right? See, when progressives don't deal with these dynamics within the human person, and a demagogue comes along, we're just talking speculatively, but let's say somebody ran for president and won. Just hypothetical here. I'm just spitballing. And unleashed a wave of fascism in the country. And the progressives are saying, well, let's meet halfway. Let's make a deal. And you have the demagogue that's hitting on the bongos of the human heart. You can go back. The scientists are all smarty pants. They're laughing at you. They're making fun of you. All those people that use big words are making fun of you. Muslims, they're all dangerous. Forget about the Inquisition, forget about the Crusades. And so these are very vital dynamics to be in touch with. And Paul is very much cognizant of this, that it feels truer to be more regressed. And if you've ever been really angry or really frustrated or really depressed, you've experienced this. You want to get down to that deep place. When I was in training for counseling, they said, never lose track where your alligator is. Right? You're not going to get rid of the snake. What a great symbol for the reptilian core of a human being, a snake. Mythologies have a truth. You know, it's not historical truth, it's not scientific truth, but it's the truth as we live it out. So what a great way to express that something whispers inside of you that says, them people aren't right. Right? That your suspicions are absolutely true. And we regress and we think that that's getting closer to what's going to make us happy. And the opposite is true. So the first kind of clue that Paul gives us is this idea that sin is missing a target. You remember what Paul said the target was? See, I think I need to retire because this happened the first service too. It's like 40 years. This is the only punchline I've ever given. Love. Right? In Corinth, and don't feel bad. It's sin. It's sin. But we're going to sacrifice a goat after church and everything will be fine. Now think about that. I think we all agree with the idea that love is when we're happiest. That's when we're most functional. That's when we're most in balance. But most of the time we don't put it first. We don't make that the bullseye of our life. And it's understandable because, again, we're critters. And when we're not functioning on whole, you can't feel it. And so you don't choose it. But I think what Paul is saying is it doesn't start as a feeling. It begins as a kind of direction that you go toward, away from your fears and towards your hopes, kind of thing. So I think the first challenge is to put compassion or love or whatever word you want to use for that back at the center of what you're aiming at in life. And we roll our way there. It's like you stumble, you forget it, you know. That's the human, it's a spiral dance. You don't get there directly. So the first is to put compassion back at the center. And the second is to realize Paul only uses sin in the singular, at least all that I can remember of the times of reading it. That instead of it having a list of things you did wrong, that's not really ever the problem, is it? It's what happens before you make that terrible mistake. How do you feel before you do that unacceptable thing? You're feeling pretty bad. That's what Paul means, right? You're out of tune with things. You're miserable. And you just want to grab a little bit of happiness. If that means tripping this other person at your workplace, we get down operating pretty low. But that's what this idea of the tree of good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil, it usually gets translated as the tree of knowledge, and that Christianity hates knowledge and this kind of thing. But it's the knowledge of good and evil means judgment, dualistic judgment. When you are off balance, you cannot trust your judgments. Right? You don't see anybody else is wounded, they're all bad. Right? When you're in balance, you realize that. And you get suspicious, you think everybody's trying to trick you, everybody's lying to you, you can't trust anybody. Human beings are creeps. And the fact that you're a human being, you don't really take that into the calculation. It's all very human stuff, and that's what Paul is trying to talk about. These stories, like the knowledge, there's two trees in the garden. One is the tree of life, and the other is the tree of judgment about life. I mean, it's a poem, it's poetry, but you get stuck outside of yourself looking at life and judging life, and the only way to stop that is to jump into life again. When I was in high school, I ran across a quote by Soren Kierkegaard, which is like an early, wonderful and strange Christian theologian. And he said, purity of heart means to will one thing. And that drove me crazy. What does that mean, purity of heart? What's the one thing you're supposed to will? Yeah, love. But it's a special kind of love. It's ecological love. It's not love of your country. It's not love of yourself. It's not love of your small group. The love that we're looking for is falling in love with everyone and everything at the same time. And sometimes you taste it. Sometimes it just happens. Like you fall in love with one person, or so you think, and all of a sudden there's all the birds are singing, wonderful things, and all of the songs you love that you'll never remember again after you have a little time together. But what Paul is saying is that love is available, but if we don't fall out of it into our judgments of things. If I realize that everything I'm doing to you, I'm doing to my larger self, that's going to change me. I may not feel affection at first, I may not ever get there. I mean, this isn't something that, but it's a wonderful general direction in life that makes bliss available on a much more regular basis. So when you think about what would make me happiest, it's the common good, loving the common good. You start with your own happiness, and then you care about somebody else's happiness. And all of a sudden you realize that working for everyone's happiness gives you a joy that nothing else can quite compete with. So that's the second thing, that it's singular. What we're talking about is this, is not the mistakes you make. You can leave your calculator at home. The terrible things that you've done are not what made you do that. Right? It's that lack of balance, that lack of harmony. And the final thing is, Paul talks about predestination. As a Presbyterian, you probably have heard a different version of predestination. Predestination doesn't mean that everything is ordered to make something happen. That's what happened to it. Some people are chosen, some people are not. What Paul is talking about is an acorn is predestined to be an oak tree. Right? So it's written within you. The wisdom that you're seeking for is written within you, but you've not been in the kind of environment where it blossoms. It's much more about blossoming into something than being a obedient, thoughtless person. And notice that right after he says something about Jesus being the only begotten one, which is actually coming from Plato, he shifts to the firstborn, that we might be the firstborn. So it's not just about Jesus. It's not ever just about Jesus. The idea that Jesus came down here to tell us how good he is and how smart he is doesn't sound a lot like love to me. But what if it's coming to teach you that you are the beloved child of God? And that you only need to trust that to blossom. Put that first, and then to let it blossom. Paul says all of nature is groaning in childbirth. That sounds pretty evolutionary, doesn't it? Everything is struggling to give birth through you and me. We are the thing that changes all of that chaos and confusion into wisdom, and all of that pain into courage. Not all the time, but some of the time. And it only has to happen some of the time. But you have to be who you are. And that's what I think the fig leaves, you probably haven't had a lot of dealings with fig leaves. I haven't anyway. When you make clothes out of fig leaves, they're very prickly. So what you have is a metaphor for human shame. And the point is not for you to feel shame, but to stop feeling shame. I mean, if we were to update the story, is that Adam and Eve became ashamed of their humanity, their nakedness. And so they built underwear out of Brillo pads. I think Brillo pads is the closest we get to fig skin kind of joke. A lot of scripture's humorous. It's a joke because it's trying to tease us out of our fears and our, empty desires. Punchline in a thimble. I guess I could have saved you a lot of time by putting that first, huh? We could already be drinking coffee now. Hopefully, we've been leading up to this point. But that whatever happens can be your opportunity to give birth to love. It may not start as the feeling love. It doesn't have to. I've seen people dying of cancer whose love came out at that moment in a way that washed me in a light that I never got in philosophy class or seminary. Some of the greatest teachers I've ever had didn't know what was going on. They didn't know what to do. Little Danny Gladney dying of brain tumor. And his big concern was for his family. Just this deep, profound wisdom. So many people over the years. And I think the passage is inviting you and me to live that life. The story of sin is not about shame, it's about the human predicament and becoming skilled and unraveling what traumatizes you and triggers you, to move love to the center whenever you feel off balance and out of harmony, to not trust your judgments about the world when you're off balance, and finally to realize that the gift doesn't come from regressing, finding the fundamentals. It's not the roots, it's the blossom, the perfume, the fruit, to find the courage to empty yourself completely. I've always liked, there's a Zen Buddhist who I quote a lot, Suzuki. This is Zen. This is not like Paul and Calvinism and all that kind of stuff. It says, when you do something, you should do it with your whole body and mind. You should be concentrated on what you do. You should do it completely like a good bonfire. You should not be a smoky fire. You should burn yourself completely. If you do not burn yourself completely, a trace of yourself will be left in what you do. So, moving love to the center, not trusting the judgments that we have when we're off balance. But most importantly, realizing that whatever happens to us can be an opportunity to give birth to love. Well, this is my understanding of the passage, but you're not limited to that, so we'll take a minute for you to think of how you could have said that better. So thank you for your kind attention.